Hello again, guys, and welcome back to another Big Al Devlin video. And thank you very much for tuning in. Every view is appreciated. Feel free to share this with friends, like, comment, subscribe, all the rest of it. But I'm not here to beg. I'm a Viking, in my own little way, I suppose. But this video is all about the topic of the Aesir or Aesir and Vanir War, which was a major thing to consider, really, in many respects, regards to the creation of the Viking and ancient Nordic peoples' pantheon of gods. It shows that even the good guys fought one another very early on. There was no clear good and evil amongst their gods, and it shows, and as a result, explains how people who were members of the ancient Nordic people understood conflict themselves. Conflict was not necessarily an evil deed or anything like that. Sometimes it was a necessity. Um, but at the same time, as you'll see when I go into the analysis of the Aesir-Vanir War, um, it actually really shows tolerance and shows you why the Vikings as a whole were very good at colonizing and populating foreign lands, and by simply intermingling with the locals, as for example the Normans did with England. Okay, without going into deep history, I'm going to go and shut up because I do have a tendency to waffle and take 10 minutes to get into the story. I'm going to go straight into the story of the Aesir-Vanir War, and after that then we'll do our analysis and our discussion. And I hope you find this both educational and entertaining, as do I. Okay, so the Aesir-Vanir War. Just before we begin, if you haven't watched my video on the Pantheon of Viking gods, watch it, because it describes what the Aesir are and the Vanir are in a very broad and brief, well, I wouldn't say brief, it takes quite a long time, it's quite a long video, but a very broad general terms. I am going to do, I haven't done, but I'm going to do immediately after this videos specifically talking about the Aesir and the Vanir separately and going into each of the gods in more detail. That will take quite a bit of time to do some research, but I am going to go into it immediately, and hopefully I'll be able to do it. But please watch that video, guys, and any other videos that have been done. Say if you're watching this a year after I filmed this, I'm sure there'll be plenty of videos describing the Aesir and the Vanir, so you know who they are. Because otherwise, this is not going to make much sense to you. You'll be like, who are the Aesir, who are the Vanir? Because I'm not going to use the names of the individual gods, unless, of course, they have a particular role to play that needs to be described. So first of all, I'm going to read you the story, summarised by myself from the Edda, and the poem, the poem essentially that describes it. Okay, um, here we go. In Norse mythology, gods and goddesses usually belong to one of two tribes, the Aesir and the Vanir. We know that's not quite true. We know that there are other tribes of gods, but these are the two tribes of gods that Vikings themselves would concern themselves with, and occasionally the giants. But there are a few other tribes as well, which we have to be aware of, but not for this purposes. Throughout most of the Norse tales, deities from the two tribes get along fairly easily for pretty much the most of eternity, from beginning to end. However, it's hard to pin down firm distinctions between the two groups because they are very similar. One, the Vanir practice Sadir. They have a certain type of magic that the Aesir don't have, and the Aesir typically are very powerful, physically powerful, and very honourable and noble, very good rulers. But despite this, and despite the fact that at times when you look at the Pantheon, you're like, even I have to look at lists and go, oh yeah, that's an Aesir god. Oh no, hang on, no, it's Vanir. You forget sometimes because they're so similar. There was a time when this wasn't the case. Bear in mind, the Aesir come from Asgard. the realm highest amongst the world tree Yggdrasil. And on the branches of Yggdrasil, there was a realm called Vanenheim. And Vanenheim is the homeland of the Vanir. Okay, so these gods did come from separate realms. Okay, so separate worlds, if you wish. Okay, as the story will describe, they didn't get on particularly in the beginning. And I would actually say that the Aesir were a bunch of arseholes. And I would hate to say that because they're my gods. And ultimately, I don't mean to be nasty about it, but we'll say it as it is. Bear in mind, Viking gods are flawed. Okay? They are like you and I, capable of good and evil and messing up from time to time. Okay? So, the War of the Gods. The Vanir goddess, Freya, who is the goddess of war and love, and I believe she also had an involvement in fertility with women also, in childbirth. She was always the foremost practitioner of the art of Sadir, which I mentioned in the previous video. It's a form of magic that tries to change and influence fate. Fate rules not only men but does rule gods also, and Vikings were and the ancient Nordic people were very much believers of fate. They believed that you had a day where you were born and a day when you were destined to die, and that was it. There was no change in it. Nothing you could do could change the day you were born and the day you die. Nothing at all in your entire life. And the gods were identical to us. They were ruled by fate. But the Vanir practiced a magic, as I say, called Sadir, that tried to influence fates by interweaving and changing the weave of the fates that existed for particular individuals. And it was a form of magic and shamanism, ultimately, that was practiced by humans also. And I will go into more detail into that at a later date. It's something I'm not too familiar with, but I know it was practiced by humans also, Vikings, human Viking, Nordic people. Okay, but Freya was probably the most powerful and, as I say, most foremost practitioner of Sadir. And like historical Sadir practitioners, she wandered from town to town plying her craft for hire. So, these people who practiced Sadir, they were like more nomadic than your typical individual. They may not have a set home. They would go from town to town and try to make money or trade for food or whatever was their desire. They would trade their ability to see fate and possibly even alter it for obviously a sum of money. Okay, and if they're particularly good at it, they might, for example, influence and advise earls and kings and things like that, high up people. But the mass majority of them were just travelling nomads. Okay. Now, under the name of, and I have no idea how to pronounce this because it's not even an English letter, so I do apologise, but Hayor or Haida, that was the name that Freya took when she travelled. But basically, it translates directly into English to mean the word bright. So we'll call her Bright from now on, okay, while she's travelling. Okay, just simply because I have no idea how to pronounce that name. I do apologise, guys. I'll learn one day. I will have to learn Icelandic and Swedish and Norwegian and until I finish. There's a lot of languages out there, and once I learn them, I might have a shot at trying to pronounce some of these words. Anyway, she eventually came under the name of Bright to Asgard, the home of the Aesir. Now, the Aesir were quite taken aback by her powers and zealously sought her services, for the Aesir had no affinity for magic really whatsoever. Yeah, they could, summon a storm and throw a few lightning bolts around here and there, but This was magic far beyond their own, far more powerful, far, far, far more powerful, because it could influence eternity ultimately, and ultimately try to break time and certainly extend one's life. But soon they realized that their values of honor, kin, loyalty, and obedience to law, which they were very famous for. Okay, the Aesir were a good group of people, really. Well, gods, really. Were being pushed aside by their selfish desires to fulfill the witches' their desires that they sought to fulfill with the witches' magic. Okay, so bear in mind that they can be forgiven for that. If you're a human being, you can find that you can find out when you're going to die and change it, extend your life, or bring value, riches into your life if you live a life of poverty or anything along those lines. And you have a real way of doing it. You're going to be tempted by this magician, so to speak, this shaman. But quite quickly, as I say, the Aesir were known very much for their honour, kin, loyalty, and obedience to law, and it was going haywire because they were all forgetting their values that made them them. Okay, just for you know, they were making sacrifices to their themselves, ultimately for a taste of this magic. As a result, they blamed Freya for their own shortcomings, and it was their shortcomings. Freya was not trying to corrupt them. Freya was not asking a lot from them, but they became obsessed so much with their desires for this magic that they became blindsided and decided, instead of blaming themselves, they would blame the stranger. And they blamed Freya for their shortcomings, as I say, for their desires. And they called her Gulveig, or Gold Greed, okay, and attempted to murder her 3 times. 3 times they tried to burn her, and 3 times she was reborn from the ashes, like a phoenix, I suppose. Because of this, the Aesir and the Vanir pretty obviously came to hate one another, but also to fear one another. I mean, being burnt alive 3 times. One, yeah, you're going to be pissed off and you're going to be angry with those who are doing it to you, especially as all you're doing is just, offering them a service that they're paying for. They don't have to pay for it. You're not forcing them to pay you. But at the same time, you are going to be afraid because the Aesir, they're powerful. They were powerful enough to take Freya, who was a very powerful goddess, and they burnt her, not just once, but 3 times. And obviously the Aesir, they were like, wow, okay, we've burnt her, and she's not dead. Okay, we'll burn her again. What? Not dead? Burn her again. And so that fear and hatred between the two of them obviously erupted into hostilities and into war. The Aesir, or Aesir, fought by the rules of plain combat. As I say, they are an honourable tribe of gods, with weapons and brute force. You imagine, Thor with his hammer Mjolnir, which he didn't have at this point. He used an axe instead. But I can't remember the name of the axe. But you can imagine Thor and Odin and Odin's other sons like Tyr and stuff going in, smashing into the battle lines. They'd cause mayhem, with their brute force and their weaponry. But the Vanir used subtler means of magic. The Vanir knew they couldn't fight them one-on-one. They were physical and they were capable of protecting themselves, but not against the Aesir. The Aesir were the best at the best when it came to fighting. And so they used their magic. And as a result, the war went on for a long, long time, with both sides gaining the upper hand turn by turn. Okay, so at one point the Vanir would be on top, at one point the Aesir would take the upper hand. But ultimately, the war was going to obviously last a very long time, if not an eternity. Eventually, the two tribes of divinities became weary of fighting and decided to call a truce. Now, that's not an alliance. Make this as clear as possible. This was a truce, and not a very good one. Okay, neither side were happy about this, but they decided, you know what, we'll have peace for at least a short period of time because we're tired of fighting. We're tired of, getting hit by, Thor's fists and Odin's spear and all the rest of it. And we're sick of being deceived by magic and being twisted by God knows what the Vanir would do to them. Okay, and so, as I say, a truce was called by both sides equally, but it wasn't. There's an old Roman saying that there's only one thing worse than war, and that's an ugly peace. And that's exactly what you had in this setting. It was a very, very ugly peace, and it was customary during a period of a truce amongst these times, amongst both Norse and Germanic peoples, to pay tribute to each other. The two sides would pay tribute to each other, and they would pay tribute by sending hostages to live amongst the other tribe. Basically, it's a sort of guarantee, okay, that if you misbehave and you break the trust, we'll kill whoever's living amongst us. And at the same time, you kill our friends, well, we'll kill your friends. As I say, it's an ugly peace that is between the Vanir and Aesir at this time. It was not something that was good by any means. And this was practiced historically, as I say, amongst Germanic, Norse, and Anglo-Saxon people. Typically, those that were given were people of value. You just didn't send random peasants. You sent princes, and princesses. You sent people of value, people who you wanted to live. Because that was demanded of you, but in return you demand the same from your opponent. Okay, and so Freya and Njord of the Vanir. Bear in mind, Freya was the head of the Vanir. That's the queen. That's the very top. That's like Odin going, okay, for the other side. And Njord of the Vanir went to the Aesir, and Honir, or Heinir, as it's pronounced actually, and Mimir went to the Vanir. Okay, now Njord and his children seem to have lived more or less in peace within Asgard. Asgard was a nice place, and the Asgardians, or the Aesir, okay, they were honourable people. They were good gods. For Odin, they were of a good nature, and that's why they were, the gods that were typically prayed to by the Vikings. Okay, they were noble in nature, and so they looked after their prisoners well. Okay, and Njord, and as I say, he had children when he was there and all the rest of it. They lived in peace, but the same, unfortunately, could not be said about Heinir and Mimir within Vanheim. The Vanir were not quite as kind, indeed. And the Vanir immediately saw that Heinir was somehow able to deliver incomparably wise advice upon any problem, and obviously being a race of gods that valued, Sadia, magic, this magic that could interact and change fate, they took wisdom seriously. Wisdom and intelligence and the ability to interpret and solve puzzles and so on and so forth was very highly valued, and so they felt that they had an incredibly valuable hostage in Heinir. Okay, but they, for some reason, despite their own intelligence and their own wisdom, failed to notice that this wise advice that came from Heinir, who was, the loudest of the two hostages, so we say, actually only came when he had Mimir in his company. Mimir spoke through Heinir. Mimir did not want really to be seen as helping the Vanir, because he was, he wanted to be back in Asgard. Okay, he didn't want to be helping. As I say, it was an ugly piece. He did not want to be helping his enemies, but at the same time, he wanted an easier life, if not for himself, certainly for his friend Heinir. Okay, and so he told Heinir whenever he was asked a question, this wise advice to give to the Vanhenheims or to the Vanir. Okay, and Heinir, the reason why Mimir looked after him was Heinir was actually a very slow-witted, and this is not my word, it's the word of the he had itself, so I don't mean any offence when I say it, but he's described as a simpleton, okay, who was at loss for words when Mimir was not there to counsel him. So it's a bit of like Of Mice and Men, if you've seen Of Mice and Men, Lenny and I forget the other character's name, but basically Mimir felt like he had to look after this oaf, because if he proved of no value because he was stupid and not very capable of doing anything, then the Vanir would feel like they've got a useless hostage and that they'd been cheated, because they'd given their queen, they'd given Freya and Njord was a powerful god as well, they'd given two powerful gods of their own as hostages to the Asgardians, and if the Asgardians themselves had given them only one valuable hostage, then that's a problem. That would have been a problem. That's enough to cause war again. And so Mimir was trying to, as I say, add value to Heinir by allowing him to speak on his behalf. However, eventually, the Vanir actually decided that Mimir was useless. Heinir kept coming with all this advice and was, very helpful and very wise. And from time to time he said, word for word, let others decide. That was what he said when Mimir wasn't around. I mean, it sounds wise, even though he's telling you to do nothing. He's saying, I don't know, I don't understand, let others decide. He's basically saying, well, perhaps you should know the answer to this one. It's better to work it out. And so even when he was, being a simpleton, so to speak, he actually was still quite convincing. And as a result, the Vanir, after a while, they felt cheated on the hostage exchange, and so in return, they decided to do something quite heinous. They beheaded Mimir. That's the clever one, the one who was given all the advice. They didn't realise. Okay, they beheaded Mimir, and then they sent the severed head of Mimir back to Asgard, where then the distraught Odin found the head placed upon him, and was he couldn't believe it. His friend was beheaded, and his head was here, and he was like, "What the hell's going on?" And so he decided to chant his own magic, his magical poems over the head, and embalmed the head in herbs. As a result, the Mimir's head was preserved, and preserved in such a way that it continued to give indispensable advice to Odin in times of need. And so Odin, unfortunately, couldn't obviously give Mimir his full life back. He was a god and he'd been killed. You can't give any god, life back, just like you can't give a mortal in theory life back. Once you're dead, you're dead. But he did have some magic of his own, Odin, that allowed him to preserve at least the head that he had, and he valued the advice of Mimir, and he actually preserved the head, so the head could continue to advise him, and it did throughout all of his entire reign. Whenever he needed advice, he could turn to Mimir and ask him, what do you think on this? Because bear in mind, Odin was the wisest of the gods. He was very wise, but sometimes being wise is knowing when to listen to others. And so if he wasn't sure on the decision that was supposed to be made, he would ask his friend Mimir, this head that was stored behind his throne, "What do you think?" And Mimir would answer him, and normally give him very, very, very good advice indeed. Now, obviously, you would expect Odin's response to having his friend's head beheaded and taken from his body and sent to him in such a way, in such a gruesome way, to lead to instant war again. As I say, it was an ugly piece, you know, and for, I think in many ways Vanir would probably be looking for an excuse for a war. But he was just too weary and knew that they were too evenly matched. The only way that this war would end would be when both tribes literally wiped each other out. And as a result, rather than renewing the hostilities over the tragic misunderstanding, the Aesir and Vanir instead came together. They were sick of fighting one another. They knew they couldn't beat one another. And they came together as every single god amongst the pantheon of both sides spat into a cauldron. And within this cauldron, their saliva created a being called Kvasir. And this being became the wisest being of all. And so it was a collection of, essentially, Kvasir was a collection of all the wisdom of all the gods put together. And it was a way of, essentially, the gods on both the Aesir and the Vanir side pledging sustained harmony to each one another. And that's when they formed their coalition, and they lived basically between Valheim and Asgard as equals. Okay. And the story of Kvasir is something that I will tell in another video, and I believe it's in a story called the Story of Mead of Poetry. I'll have to check on that, but Mead of Poetry anyway is an interesting story to tell, and I do believe it has Kvasir in it, and it probably will be one of the next videos I do. But as I say, the next video that I do will not be that, but it will be instead the more detailed look on the individual gods themselves, the Aesir. I'll do a video on them concerning Odin and that, and I'll try to do a video on the Vanir, but it's a lot harder for them because there's not as much information. For some reason, all the poems, all the Eddas, all the information that was written, we know it was written on the Vanir, has become lost and destroyed over the 1,000 years since it was written. For some reason, it's just disappeared, and as a result, there's not a lot I can tell you, but I'll tell you as much as I can. Okay. Now that the story is over, those of you who just came here for entertainment, feel free to leave. No offence will be taken. If you wish to hear the analysis of what the inner meanings of these stories mean, the sort of hidden morals behind it, so to speak, feel free to stay also. You're more than welcome to stay here. And of course, if any of my pagan brothers are still here, you haven't had to leave for one reason or another, then hello again. This is the time when we talk about what this story means, because of course, much like a lot of the religious texts, that the stories sometimes they feel like almost like childlike stories you do tell your children, and you would tell your children these stories because they're entertaining. The War of Gods, it's epic, but obviously as adults we have to try and draw meaning from what these stories really truly represent and what they teach us, and as a result, if it's good, try to implement that into our lifestyle. And if you're an historian watching this, then obviously I hope it shows you how ancient Nords and the Vikings saw the world, as I say, and interacted with the world, and why they acted the way they did. One of the reasons was just because of the way their religion taught them how to live. Religion is just really a guideline on how to live. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've got notes written down here, and because it's getting so late, I am tired. I mean, it's it's actually over past midnight here now. I hope you don't mind, guys. I'm going to read directly from my notes. I'm not going to try and do it verbatim as such, like I normally do. I don't think you'll lose any value to what I'm saying, and I will try to add to my notes as I go along, like I normally do. I can't resist a good old talk, but if you feel that there's something that I need to elaborate on another video, that's the beauty of YouTube. I can always film a third video or second video, you know, to follow this, to discuss this in further detail. If there's enough requests for it, and I have the information and the knowledge to talk about it in detail, then of course by Thor's hammer I will. Okay, so the tale that we've just heard takes essentially a lot of points about, or makes a lot of points about polytheistic theology and ethics. Okay, because the ethics that exists between a monotheistic religion like Christianity or Judaism or Islam or anything along those lines, their ethics differ very much to the ethics of cultures that have polytheism behind them, you know, to guide them. Because unlike the one God monotheistic religions, polytheistic gods are often at a variance with one another and are tied to contradictory systems of values and ways of being in the world. Polytheism accepts that pluralism is inevitable and also healthy. Okay. Monotheistic religions, however, try to crush this pluralism and subject everyone to the same set of values and standard of conduct. So, guys, this is not me having a go at monotheistic religions in any way. If you're Christian, I have no problem. My mom's Christian, okay, so I have no. I think it's a lovely religion, very peaceful religion. Peace is always good, but at the same time, the way that it can a monotheistic religion can be interpreted is you know, it's just as I said there. You know, there are monotheistic religions do try to crush pluralism and make everyone essentially act to the same set of values as a standard of conduct. I mean, look at the Ten Commandments. I mean, I know that's Old Testament as such, but you know what I'm trying to say is you have to live your life this certain way to get to heaven. Whereas in a polytheistic religion, the gods themselves don't even really, you know, agree on many things. I mean, if you talk to I mean, it's that old philosophy sort of thing. If you put two people in a room, they'll never agree on anything, you know. That's why a lot of people believe democracy is a bad thing, because you can never get a unanimous vote, so to speak, on anything between anyone. Okay, people are different, people are individuals, and there's always going to be, at one point in time or another, over an eternity, at least anyway, over a very long time, there's always going to be disagreement and arguments, and in this case, possibly war. Okay, but at least with a polytheistic religion, if you see your gods are at conflict with one another, if you can see that your gods cannot even agree over certain things, then how can you expect someone else, such as you know, a stranger, to conform to your own belief systems or morals? You can't. It's not about converting them, so to speak, like it is for monotheistic religions. It's not like, you know, going out as a I forget the term now. Is it? It's not minister. It's where they send out a religious man, a priest or whatever, to convert people. Anyway, it's not about converting people to your religion and making them act in the same way as you. You accept everyone's different. everyone can act differently. Everyone can have a different set of ethics, but everyone at the same time, just like the gods, can get along. You just have to make it work. Okay? You just have to make it work. And accept that, yes, you can fight, yes, you can conflict between one another, but eventually you'll reach a point where you're just weary and you're tired and you're sick of war and you're sick of conflict, you're sick of arguing. And so, isn't it better to cooperate with one another and use the skills that you have? And because you have a different background and different knowledge base to myself, that makes you valuable on that certain things, and I'm valuable here and you're valuable there. If we put all heads together, we can be, you know, it's not just additive, it's summative. You know, we can be really valuable to one another and can really achieve true greatness by working together and putting all our skills together. And that's essentially what a polytheistic religion ultimately breaks down the barriers for. It allows for cooperation to happen, because if your gods ultimately you know, are benefiting, if you believe that your gods benefit by forming, you know, this pantheon, this coalition together and by working together, then surely it's the same for you as a human being. As I say, the gods are just humans plus one. They're superhumans essentially in many respects. And so yes, they when they have conflicts, it goes really bad, but when they do good, they do really good. Well, we can't achieve the same that a God can achieve, but we can do our own little contribution to the world. And if we all group together, all our little contributions add together, just like the gods' contributions, and they work together do also, and you can achieve great things. Okay. And in fact, actually, what's interesting is we can actually catch a whiff of the monotheistic attitude in the Aesir's initial attempt to destroy Freya through encouraging them to follow pursuits that were antithetical to their own values. Thankfully, however, the Aesir eventually realised that their attempt to kill her was futile, and that the two tribes and deities should instead learn to live side by side in an atmosphere of mutual tolerance and respect. And that's really the message that the defenders of the universal standard of morality have yet to learn. Okay? Is that it's mutual tolerance and respect that allows us to work together but still remain different at the same time. People don't want to be the same. We're not robots. We're not honeybees. We're not drones. We want to all be different. We want to have the choice to believe what we want to believe. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter, providing we have mutual tolerance and respect. Just as in a polytheistic religion, there is mutual tolerance and respect amongst the gods that typically rule. Okay, the gods that don't rule, i.e. if you look at the ice giants, there's no mutual tolerance and all the rest of it. There is conflict even amongst themselves, their own people. Okay, there's conflict. Okay, and they achieve nothing. It takes them a very long time, and the only time they achieve anything, well, it's the destruction of the world. It's not exactly great, you know, and it's only when they're led by one of the Aesir that they manage, you know, Loki, that they actually manage to achieve it anyway. So they require, you know, an Aesir to achieve it anyway. So there's that to consider. And believe it or not, it was actually noticed by a very old Norse scholar called E.O.G. It's E.O.G. Tervel Petra, that offers, but that he himself noticed the summary of the meaning within this tale, and that it was repeated in all branches of the Indo European family. That means that basically all of the religions, all the old religions, pre-Christian religions, and such as the Norse, the Irish, I don't know why they just say it's Irish, it's Gaelic, okay, but the Norse, the Irish, no, I'm going to correct it, the Norse, the Gaelic, the Roman, and Indian tales, their own stories, their own religious stories, all have this, which are all polytheistic religions, all have this same tale to tell, and the meaning behind it is the same in every tale. And when the teachers are, of in the temples, or wherever the Romans, they worshipped in temples. Indians, they worship in temples. The Irish, they worshipped more outside than anywhere else, but they did have the odd temple. The Norse, I don't know actually really. No, again, they were more like the Celtic. They believed in being in nature itself, but again, they would have, the odd sort of uh, shrine, so to speak, to their gods. The Every single one of those religions that have a common origin point that branched off have this same story, and he describes it in these words, quoting him directly. He explains how gods and men who have such different interests and ambitions, such as the agriculturist, the merchant, the warrior, and the king, can live together in harmony. That was noticed by an ancient Norse man, a Viking. A Viking wrote, essentially, that doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what your interests are, doesn't matter what your ambitions are, doesn't matter whether you're a farmer, a merchant, warrior, a king, we all can live together in harmony. Why? Because of this. This is what our religion means. This is what it's teaching us and it's telling us. And I think that's a good place to end, because it's a beautiful moral behind the story, and I hope it's one that propagates itself, because we do live in, certainly within England at least anyway, and I don't want to get into political stuff, but we seem to be living in a more or less tolerant world in many respects. I mean, the world is far more tolerant than it was 500 years ago, far more tolerant, but it seems to be going backwards now from like 100 years ago, or certainly 30, well, no, it might say my father's generation, 30, 40 years ago, we seem to be going backwards. We're becoming less and less tolerant towards other people and other cultures. And it's not just within England. You can see it in America as well, and things like that. And it's a shame. And it's I'm hopeful, obviously, at least my brothers and sisters here can at least be a part of something different to where everyone else is going to. I'll see you soon, guys. My next video will be on the Aesir, and then the next one on the Vanir. If for some reason I'm struggling to get a lot of information on the Vanir, I might just tag them on to the end of the Aesir video. Okay. In the meantime, after that, I will be doing the Mead of Poetry and the Kvasir. But in the meantime, if there's anything that you want me to discuss at a later date, please put it in the comment section. If there's anything you need to elaborate on or expand upon, or do an additional video to going into more detail with, then please feel free to put that in the comments as well, and I will do my very damn best to help you guys out there. I can't always do it, either because I don't have the knowledge, or more often I don't have the time, but I will do my best to answer as many questions as I possibly can. I want a really nice community here, guys, for us all feel free to talk about our religion and our belief set as best as possible. Nice one, guys. Thank you. Bye bye.